Hi, welcome to Prime Recap. After finding a book capable of taking people's lives, Light Yagami begins to exterminate criminals across the planet, but things change when he begins to be investigated by L, the most famous detective in the world. Today we will recap the story of Death Note and Death Note, the last name, from 2006. After almost being attacked by some guys at a bar in Tokyo, a young man named Light Yagami finds a dark-covered notebook with the title, Death Note, and decides to take it home. Upon arriving at his residence and opening the notebook, the boy finds a set of rules on the first pages, with the first of them being, the human whose name is written in this notebook will die. As he reads the rules, Light thinks this must all be some sort of random madness. But as he is the son of a detective and has always dreamed of ridding the world of evil people, he decides to write the name of a criminal he saw on the news, a man who was convicted of taking the life of a student. After writing the criminal's name in the Death Note, Light goes to bed without much expectation that it will work and even thinking he's a little silly. But when reading the newspaper the next morning, he comes across the news that the criminal was found dead in the middle of the night, the victim of a heart attack. Even though it's very strange, Light suspects it was a simple coincidence and goes to college. But on the way back, the young man finds those same men who almost stabbed him in the bar, and knowing that now they won't miss the opportunity, Light decides to take the final test and writes the name of one of them in the notebook, causing another heart attack inexplicably, this time right before his eyes. But why a heart attack? It turns out that one of the rules of the Death Note says that if the holder of the notebook does not specify a reason for death, the victim will suffer a heart attack. Now fully assured that the Death Note really works, Light starts walking home in shock as he thinks about the possibilities it will bring. But along the way, he has a terrifying encounter with Ryuk, the Shinigami who owns the notebook. 4 months after finding that deadly weapon, Light is cleaning up the world by becoming known on the internet as Kira. But unsurprisingly, it wasn't long before the entire police world suspected that there really was someone behind these hundreds of heart attacks and started hunting him, including his own father, the head of the Japanese task force Soichiro Yagami. After several months of trying to solve the problem with his men, the commissioner decides to contact L, the most famous detective in the world, responsible for solving several cases that seemed impossible. With the help of his right-hand Watari, L communicates with the police through his computer and shows them the graphs of the crimes committed by Kira, indicating those cases of heart attack that were not something natural and that were most likely carried out by a single person. After meeting with the commissioner, L goes on a worldwide broadcast to speak directly to Kira, taunting him to the point where Light loses his temper and writes his name in his Death Note, causing the detective live in front of him to have a heart attack with billions of viewers, but it was all a trap. As soon as the would-be detective loses his life, the real L emerges without showing his face and begins speaking in a modified voice, revealing that the one who suffered the heart attack was actually Lind L. Taylor, a criminal sentenced to death who was just impersonating him. As a way of proving his theory, L asks Kira to take his life, but by staying alive, the detective concludes that the villain can only take the lives of people he knows the full name and face. Shortly after confirming his first suspicion, L reveals that transmission was actually restricted to the city of Tokyo, so now he knows where to look for Kira. After so many advances in a single day, L asks the police to assemble a graph with the times of the deaths, and with that, he can see a pattern. The crimes always happen during breaks between classes and on weekends, meaning Kira is most likely a college student. Worried about all the discoveries L has made in such a short time, Light asks his father to join the investigation team with the intention of manipulating things and trying to exonerate himself. But Detective Yagami denies, saying that despite being extremely intelligent, this case is too dangerous for a university student to participate in. After being rejected by his father, Light manages to get into the police database, and upon discovering that the police already know that Kira is a college student, he decides to eliminate 24 criminals in one day, one for every hour, in order to show the police officers that he can manipulate their eliminations as he sees fit. But this was not a very smart decision, as now L knows that his target has access to the police files, that is, Kira is someone close to some of the officers who are participating in the investigation, leaving the number of suspects smaller and smaller. With this new information, L asks some FBI agents to follow the relatives of everyone on the team, including Light himself, but the young man quickly realizes that someone is after him and begins to think of a way to find out his name and thus eliminate him. Knowing this, Ryuk tells Light that with the eyes of a Shinigami he will be able to see the name and life expectancy of other people who don't have a Death Note. But as the price to gain this power is half of their life expectancy. Light rejects the offer and decides to try to find out the agent's name on his own. When rereading the rules, Light sees the paragraph that talks about the cause of death and decides to do some tests with prisoners to find out how much he can manipulate people. thus discovering that it is even possible to force his targets to write things and do stupid action, like trying to break out of prison. With this new discovery and knowing that anyone who touches the Death Note can see the Shinigami, Light decides to put his plan into action. At dawn, the young man decides to take the bus to college along with his girlfriend Shiori, and as soon as they get into the vehicle, the agent who is following him also gets in to sit behind them. Then he is confronted by Light wanting to know why they are being followed, but the agent pretends not to know. As soon as the bus stops at the next stop, a thief enters the vehicle and surrenders the driver, initiating a robbery. Upon seeing the man, Light writes on a piece of paper that as soon as the criminal approaches, he will try to immobilize him, and shows the message to the policeman. As this can be dangerous, the agent approaches and shows his badge, introducing himself as Ray Penber, an FBI special agent. He then says that he will use his training to protect them, but Light ends up dropping the piece of paper by accident and the criminal ends up seeing the message. The bandit then puts the gun to Light's head and asks what he will do now, but as soon as he finishes talking, he sees Ryuk at the corner and is startled by his devilish appearance. Desperate, the man starts shooting at the Shinigami, but when he realizes that his shots do not cause him any injury, the criminal orders the driver to stop the bus and starts running outside, but is run over when he is crossing the street. Turns out this was all part of Light's plan. By writing the bandit's name in the Death Note, he manipulated the cause of death so that the criminal hijacked that bus. Light then entered the vehicle a point early for Ray Penber to follow and took advantage of the situation to find out the agent's name. Lastly, that paper he wrote the message on was actually a piece of the Death Note that he dropped on the floor on purpose, so that as soon as the criminal touched the piece of notebook he could see the Shinigami. In the end, all he had to do was write in the Death Note that the thief would run out of the bus and be run over right away, and so it happened. Now Light knows his pursuer's name and face and can write it in the Death Note, but he knows that if he did that he would practically be confessing that he was Kira to L. Since he is being followed, he assumes that other agents are following the other office's relatives, and that if he wants to finish off Ray, he will have to eliminate all the agents at once. To do so, Light starts following Ray until he finds him in the subway and puts his plan into action. He leaves an envelope where he's able to find it, and when the agent opens it, he finds a radio communicator and some sheets of paper. As soon as Ray puts on the communicator, Light in the next car causes a criminal on the subway to have a heart attack to prove that he really is Kira. Continuing with his plan, Light asks Ray how many FBI agents are on the mission and forces the man to write the names of his 11 colleagues, in addition to the team leader, on some sheets that are in the envelope. After writing the names and putting in the envelope, the special agent sees Ryuk outside the subway. That paper where he wrote the names were the Death Note pages. It turns out that even if you don't own the notebook, if someone writes a person's name on the paper, the Death Note will work normally. Unaware that he has just taken the lives of his colleagues, Ray obeys Kira's orders and leaves the subway at the next station, but ends up losing his life a few seconds later, victim of a heart attack right in front of his fiancée who was following him. After these deaths, dozens of police members of Soichiro's team dropped out of the investigation fearing for their lives. Now with the team downsized, L decides to stay closer to the group and finally reveals his appearance to the other detectives, as well as asking them to call him by the alias Ryuzaki as a security measure. Continuing his investigation even after this defeat, L is watching the station's security camera tapes when he notices Ray pointing into the car in its final moments. With that, he is completely sure that Kira is one of the people being investigated by Ray, that is, someone from the commissioner's family or Detective Yugami. At the same time, Naomi, Ray's fiancée, who is also a detective, starts an investigation into her husband's death on her own and decides to go to the hijacked bus company to find out what happened that day, thus managing to discover that Ray was following Light. With this information, Naomi goes to the student claiming to be Ray Penber's fiancé and starts accusing him of being Kira, hitting the whole strategy he's outlined so far, but he pretends he doesn't know anything. At his residence, Light decides to plan a strategy in case he becomes unable to write and begins to schedule the deaths to take place in the next few days. But this idea turns out to be useful in another way. Knowing that Kira is most likely one of the Yugami family members, L installs security cameras all over the house, especially in Light's bedroom, who is currently the main suspect. As soon as he gets home, Light quickly notices that someone has been in his room and begins to suspect that security cameras have been placed around the room, meaning he has to be more careful now than ever. As the days go by, the deaths that Light wrote about in advance begin to happen, but L is still not convinced of the boy's innocence and says he can only dismiss him as a suspect after a recent criminal is eliminated. As the days go by, Light knows that he is getting higher and higher in the suspect rankings and that he needs to act soon. After dinner on the 7th day, Light takes a packet of chips to eat in his room to spend the night studying. While he's in the room doing his chores, a last-minute report starts on television. A man suspected of kidnapping a girl was arrested after the victim's body was found in his home. Upon seeing the news, Elle and Detective Yugami begin to go through the cameras watching Light's family, but none of them are watching the report and they don't take any suspicious action. Suddenly, the news is interrupted by a reporter who announces that the criminal who has just been arrested suffered a heart attack in the middle of the interrogation, and with that, Elle is forced to remove the cameras as Light has proven himself innocent. But that was also part of the plan. After taking the packet of chips, Light somehow managed to get a small TV and a piece of the death note inside the package, so when the news of the crime aired he used his left hand to write the criminal's name so the cameras couldn't see him. After another defeat, Elle receives a call from Naomi saying that she will prove that Light is Kira risking her own life and asks the detective to observe the security cameras of the art gallery. A few minutes after the request, Naomi captures Shiori and forces her to call Light to ask him on a date. Upon arriving at the place, Light finds Shiori being taken hostage and is confronted by Naomi, who tries to convince him to confess that he is Kira. But the boy incessantly denies it. As a last-ditch attempt to get him to reveal his true identity, Naomi reveals her real name and tells Kira to eliminate her if he wants to save Shiori. At that moment, the police begin to approach the place, and taking advantage of the fact that Naomi was distracted by the sound of the siren, Shiori breaks free and starts running towards Light. Trying to prevent her hostage from escaping, Naomi shoots Shiori, who loses her life in Light's arms. Feeling guilty for eliminating an innocent person, Naomi immediately regrets it and takes her own life with a shot to the head. One more person failed to capture Kira. It turns out that when Naomi went to confront Light for the first time, she ended up revealing herself to be Rei's fiancé. Light then began to investigate, and by going to talk to the priest who would perform the wedding, he managed to find out Naomi's real name. He used the death note to force her to lure Kira into the gallery and call Elle to ask him to watch the security camera. Finally, it was enough for Light to write that when the hostage tried to escape, Naomi would shoot her a few shots and take her own life, regretting her crime. In Shiori's case, Light also scripted her death in the death note. He wrote that the young woman would be kidnapped and taken to the gallery to wait for her boyfriend. Finally, it was enough for the boy to write that she would be shot in the back when she tried to flee into her boyfriend's arms. All of this was Light Yagami's plan for Naomi to eliminate Shiori in front of him, and thus, he was able to use this fact as an argument to join the investigation and capture Kira. With his plan completed, Light meets with his father and asks to be placed on the search party, but Elle himself emerges from the shadows and invites him to use his intelligence to help with the investigation. On the other side of Tokyo, a famous presenter named Misa Amane ends the recording of her show and prepares to go home. Along the way, she begins to be pursued by a maniac who is totally obsessed with her and wants them both to go to the afterlife together. However, when he finally manages to corner her, the lunatic suddenly begins to suffer a heart attack, falling to the ground lifeless next to the death note. The girl touches the notebook and sees Shinigami Rem, owner of this death note. After Misa's entire family was wiped out by a psychopath, Gellus, a Shinigami, felt sorry for the girl and decided to be her guardian, following her every step to this day. Realizing that the maniac was about to take Misa's life, Gellus decided to save her by writing the man's name in his death note. With that, Gellus broke the main rule of the Shinigami, which is to always take lives and never save them, thus turning his body to dust and passing all his remaining life to Misa. Before he lost his powers, Gellus asked Rem to take care of Misa, and so, the Shinigami decided to give him his death note. Well, after Shiori's funeral, Watari takes Light to the investigation base where he and Elle begin a game of chess, while the detective reads the strategies Kira has followed so far with impressive accuracy. But he ends up getting a checkmate at the end of the game. At Sakura TV's headquarters, a reporter begins her program by saying that a person who calls himself Second Kira has sent some videotapes to the station demanding that they show one of the live recordings. In the recording, the second Kira, who is actually Misa, uses a voice changer to announce that a presenter from another station will die live in a few seconds, and that's exactly what happens. Knowing that the station is broadcasting all of this by ratings feedback, the commissioner orders them to end the broadcast immediately, and one of Elle's team investigators starts driving there, where he finds a group of people protesting in favor of Kira. While trying to disperse the protest being broadcast live by the station, the detective suddenly begins to feel sick and suffers a heart attack. Noticing the strange movement, the security of the station approach trying to help, but as soon as they appear in front of the cameras they are eliminated along with the detective. Observing the whole situation, Elle assumes that this new Kira can kill just by seeing people's faces and asks the cops to get away from the cameras. Before the video ends, Misa sends a direct message to the original Kira saying that, as he must have noticed, she possesses the eyes of the Shinigami and will use her powers to help him create the new world. As soon as the second Kira finishes his speech, Detective Yugami arrives and slams his minivan right into the station's devices, in addition to breaking the cameras and breaking the transmission wires with a few shots. After ending that scene, the detective goes to the station building to get all the tapes and visitor data along with Light. But when they are leaving, they pass Misa, and the strange girl was not able to see Kira's remaining life with her Shinigami eyes. These powerful eyes can see everyone's name, but cannot see the remaining lifespan of other notebook wielders. Knowing that Kira's real name is Light, Misa does a quick internet search and after getting his home address, decides to go visit. After showing Rem and her notebook to Light, Misa offers to get L's identity using her Shinigami eyes, and as a way to gain the boy's trust she gives him her death note. The next morning, Light is in one of his classes when he is suddenly visited by L while the two are talking around campus. Misa appears by surprise to talk to Light, who can barely control her happiness knowing that she is seeing L's real name with her Shinigami eyes. But everything turns to real chaos when the other students notice the presence of someone famous there, and immediately, they start to crowd around her. After all the confusion, Misa leaves and Light instantly calls the girl to ask L's name. However, in the middle of that crowd the girl dropped her cell phone and who found it was L himself. As Light goes back to get the device, one of the other detectives calls L to report that they've arrested Misa on suspicion of being the second Kira. After 5 days being held captive for interrogation, Misa decides to give up her death note, thus losing all her memories, so that she doesn't end up giving in and revealing Kira's real identity. When Rem tells this to Light, he then hatches a plan and buries his own death note, agreeing with Ryuka code for when he wants to stop owning the notebook. Finally, Light asks Rem to deliver Misa's death note to someone from Sakura TV who is on Kira's side, and even without understanding his plan, the Shinigami accepts. With his strategy in place, Light goes to the investigation base and asks to be kept in confinement, saying that he believes he has a second personality that could be Kira. At the station, after 3 days of searching, Rem finally finds a good successor to Kira, a reporter named Kiyomi Takada. He then drops his death note, and as soon as the woman touches it, the Shinigami appears to her and asks her to continue following Kira's path. On the 12th day since Misa was captured, even without knowing what is happening outside, Light uses his code to give up his death note, and thus, loses his memory of everything about the notebook, remembering only his own recent relationship with Misa. Following Light's orders, Rem has Kiyomi resume killings exactly 13 days after he began his confinement. However, she uses her powers to make the news, covering people's deaths, and thus, managing to get the attention of her superiors who start to consider promoting her to a position. One day, the current presenter with envy, tries to humiliate Kiyomi before going home, but the girl decides to take revenge and uses the notebook so that her rival is run over by a truck, thus leaving the position of presenter available for her to take over. As the days go by and the death toll for Kira rises again, L needs to free Misa and Light, as they were monitored 24 hours a day. Clearly they weren't the ones who committed these crimes. But still unsure of their innocence, L keeps them both at the base, Light helping with the investigation and Misa in a room all to herself. Finally free, Light starts comparing past and recent attacks, and even though Kiyomi is trying to emulate the pattern of the original Kira, it is possible to notice some differences, such as the coverage of the cases and the gender of the people involved. By analyzing the data, Light is able to see that all the victims of the current Kira are people who are in cases reported on TV, since before Kira did not focus on the relevance of the criminal before eliminating him. Another thing that Light also realized is that the targets of the new Kira are mostly people who have committed crimes against women, that is, the new Death Note holder is most likely a woman. Finally, analyzing the data, Light realizes that a large amount of the eliminations took place near or even inside Sakura TV. With this information, all the detectives immediately become suspicious of Kiyomi, who has just been promoted, and place security cameras in her apartment. While analyzing the woman's habits, they quickly manage to catch her writing in Death Note and notice that everyone who has their name written ends up losing their lives and ending up on the news in the next few days. To arrest her, the group of investigators manage to find a way for her to find out about the hidden cameras and forge a fake transmission where the identity of the new Kira will be revealed. Trying to prevent this from happening, Kiyomi accepts the deal through the eyes of Shinigami and runs to the station to see the name of who will deliver it. But as it was all a trap, as soon as she arrives at the place she is stopped by the detectives. After arresting her, one by one the investigators touch the Death Note and are able to see the Shinigami, but when it's Light's turn, in addition to being able to see Rem, he manages to recover all of his memories. That was his plan all along. It turns out that after giving up the Death Note and losing your memories, it's possible to get them back while touching someone else's notebook. Light manages to recover his memories and to continue with them. He takes advantage of the detectives being distracted by Rem and writes Kiyomi's name on a piece of the Death Note, which was hidden in his watch, thus eliminating the current owner of the notebook and gaining possession. With the death note in hand, the detectives begin to inspect it, and find out about the last rule, that if you don't write a name within 13 days, the death note's owner will die. Making Detective Yagami say that this proves Misa and Light's innocence, as he was confined for 18 days and she for 23. But it turns out that this last rule is false. It was Light himself who asked Rem to write it down at the moment he was burying his death note. With his false innocence proven, L lets Light say goodbye to Misa, but he takes the opportunity to whisper in the girl's ear where he buried his death note, asking her to go there and dig in the marked spot. Upon arriving at the location, Misa finds Light's old notebook and retrieves all of her memories as soon as she touches it, gaining possession of a new death note. In the suitcase where the notebook was kept, Misa finds a letter from Light that reminds her of their meeting at college and says that was L. With that, he asks her to write his name in her notebook, but as she saw thousands of names every day with her Shinigami eyes, and spent more than 3 weeks trapped, Misa can't remember. A few days after Kiyomi was eliminated, Kira's crimes happen again. Finding it strange that the time fits exactly with the day Misa was released, L decides to test the 13-day rule and thinks about requesting 2 convicts to do so. But Detective Yagami refuses and says he will do the experiment himself, going to the United States and writing the name of a convict to wait for the 13 days to pass. As the detective leaves on his trip, L asks Watari to bring Misa back, believing her to be the second Kira. But knowing that if they found out about the girl's crimes she would be eliminated, Rem uses the death note of the Shinigami to take the lives of Watari and L, turning his body to dust, just like Gelis. At the same time, L begins to suffer a heart attack and loses his life at the feet of Light, who confesses to be Kira, the god of the new world. With his main rival eliminated, Light takes from Misa a fake notebook he believes to be his old death note and writes his own father's name, influencing him to come back and give the notebook to him, and ultimately end his life. When he returns from his trip with the suitcase and finds his son again, Detective Yagami shows that he doesn't have the notebook and reveals that he watched everything on camera, announcing the arrest of his own son. At that moment, L, who is incredibly still alive, appears on the second floor and begins to explain what happened. On the day Misa was released, deaths began to happen, making L absolutely certain that she was the second Kira. On the second day, Watari entered her house and took the real death note, replacing it with a fake one. Knowing that at any moment the first Kira could try to eliminate him and knowing that a death written in the death note cannot be changed or advanced, L writes his own name in the notebook, marking his end for 23 days from now, the maximum limit allowed. Afterwards, L showed his name in the death note to Detective Yagami, who convinced himself to help him in his plan, staying in a secret location and watching the investigation base's security camera along with his team. On the day Misa was recaptured, Rem wrote L and Watari's name in the death note, but as the end of the world's most famous detective was already set, it ended up having no effect. Upon realizing that Watari had lost his life, L already imagined what was happening and proceeded to pretend to have a heart attack, patiently waiting for Light to confess to being Kira. At that moment, Light starts to take the piece of death note from his watch, but one of the investigators named Matsuda notices it and hits the object with a clear shot, causing the piece of paper to fall to the ground. Realizing he is still intact, Light tries to run to the paper to write the agents' names, but Matsuda shoots him right in the leg. As a last resort, Light calls Ryuk and tries to manipulate him into writing all of their names in his death note. But the only name the Shinigami writes is Light himself, who begins to die in his father's arms. After defeating Kira, L destroys the 2 death notes and decides to spend his last days alone at the base playing chess, until he suffers a heart attack and loses his life peacefully with his case solved. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.